Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Mark Schluter from Millennium, and I'm excited to introduce our speakers for today's session, the value of value selling and marketing. Our speakers today include Peter Ostrow, SiriusDecisions, Research Director, Sales Enablement Strategies, and Tom Pacello, CEO and founder of Millennium, and well known as the ROI guy. I've posted the blog links for both Peter and Millennium in the chat section of WebEx, along with a link to the book, The Millennium Frugalnomic Survival Guide. I encourage all of you to take a look. These are great resources filled with great content and best practices for value marketing and selling. We will be conducting Q&A at the end of the session, so please send me your questions at any time using the chat feature in WebEx and sending to all panelists. Send to all panelists. Before we start, mark your calendars and plan to attend the Business Value Roadshow sponsored by Millennium in conjunction with IDC, March 1st in Santa Clara, California, or March 9th in Boston, Massachusetts. We hope you can join us. Contact Millennium for more information and to register. Today we have some great information to cover, so let's get started. Tom?
Mark, thanks so much. And Peter, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom. Coming to you from sunny, cold, suburban Boston today.
Excellent. Well, we've got a lot of new research to talk about today, and I'm really excited about some of the things that SiriusDecisions has asked both buyers and sellers of B2B solutions. And definitely want to get right into it with you and ask a few questions about that research. The first is on value and what you're learning in terms of value being both a catalyst to selling and perhaps a challenge for many.
Sure. So some of the research that we've done recently in our sales enablement service here is all about why the lagging indicators, which the number one lagging indicators we all focus on is who did or didn't make their number, aren't putting executives in a happy place. And when we look at our benchmarked customer base, Tom, the top two issues for sales leaders are focused very, very high, much higher than all of the other issues that they talk to us about. Number one is 71% say our reps just don't have enough of the right ability to connect our offerings to our buyers' business issues. They're not articulating the value. They're just not having the right kind of conversations. And then in a very close second place, 65%, our reps spend too much time on non-selling activities, which means that they're focusing on internal activities, even if they're in support of conversations they should be having with their customers, or their internal non-core activities like filling out expense reports. What they're not doing is thinking about and articulating the value of their solution and the ROI on the investment that they're hoping for their buyers to make.
Yeah, and when we look at this research, going back to 2011, so how many years is that? 6 years, almost going on 7 years, that this has been the top issue in terms of sales reps not achieving quota. I can remember John Neeson being on stage presenting these results at summit after summit each April, and just in shock that it's repeated year over year, especially with sales reps' quotas and their success with those quotas not being very high. This being a persistent issue is a troubling one.
Indeed, it is. And, you feel like it's banging your head against a wall, and if we do what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always gotten. So, what's the definition of insanity? Is expecting a different result from the same activity of just, let's just give them higher quotas and see if that motivates them to sell more.
Yeah, and then they're not having the right conversations to boot. So, the two big questions we have in this session are you arming sales with the right value actualization content and tools? I want to find out a little bit from you about, what you think value actualization content and tools means. And then, if you're able to implement those tools, and perhaps one of the reasons this is a persistent issue is perhaps as sales enablement, as product marketing, as sales execs, we're not making the right business case for why we should be investing more in these types of business value actualization tools than less. So I do want to spend quite a bit of time in this session today going through the research with you that SiriusDecisions has and helping folks to really make the case for value actualization tools. But before we do that, I kind of want to, some people might not be familiar with that term, and I think it's a very unique term that SiriusDecisions has come up with around, what is a value actualization tool? So Peter, can you kind of give us a definition of it?
Sure. So from our perspective, we define value actualization tool as a platform or point solution that organizations will typically use to arm their sellers with the capability of walking their buyers through the appropriate part of their journey that leads, as those of you folks who are familiar with SiriusDecisions, we talk about the education phase, and then the solution phase, and then finally the selection phase. Value can be conveyed and should probably be discussed in all of those different phases. The problem is that too many organizations do not invest in, from our sales enablement perspective, making sure that their reps have the knowledge, skills, and processes in place to maximize every buyer interaction. And reverse engineering back from the buyer. Yesterday at a conference I was at, keynote speaker said, you know what, it's no longer coffee is for closers, coffee is for helpers. And they say, search engine optimization is now being replaced by, something like human happiness optimization or some funky acronym or term. But Tom, the point there is we all recognize as customers in our personal lives how much control we have over the experience that we have with our provider. I mean, I used to publicly proclaim and call out Comcast as one of the most hated companies in America. They invested $350 million in their customer service, and I was on the phone with them a couple of days ago over the weekend on behalf of one of my kids, and it's remarkable what a turnaround they have made because we, the customers, had enough of a voice to drive that process. But in B2B, we still don't always arm our sellers and the folks on the front line in the various sales personas who deal with our buyers and prospects to understand that the conversation has to begin and end with what value the customer sees in even talking to the rep, first of all, prior to obviously taking the time to invest in the solution itself. So we definitely look into some data about how organizations who use these sort of VATs perform versus those who don't, and some of the attributes of these organizations, which I know we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. This is about reshaping the experience that the sales rep has with the customer because customer expectations have changed. They don't necessarily want to have the discussions around the features and the price and get a demo, or if they want those conversations, they also want to know about the business. What unique value can you deliver? Give me unique insights to help me be more competitive. Help me discover issues I might not even be aware about, or help me to prioritize those issues with the rest of the stakeholders in the organization. So that's where I think value actualization tools really make a difference. And I know that you've recently conducted some research about value actualization tools, and I think you surveyed buyers, correct, in terms of their sentiment towards using these tools or engaging with sales reps in using these tools?
Exactly. It was a survey that focused on the buyer's experience, and it was kind of interesting. We were able to look at buyers' behavior around how they interacted with and consumed content and messaging from the winning provider who sealed the deal, and then we compared it with those who didn't, the second place, the loser, basically, if you want to use stark terms. And it was pretty interesting. You guys can see some of the data here on the screen. We noticed that there are three different types of procurement scenarios that are out there, and we refer to them as independent, consensus, or committee-based procurement of goods and services. And as you can see, a lot of these folks were focused on some of the hard goods, manufacturing, tech, financial services, and whatnot. People who made a purchase of some sort of B2B technology where it was just one person buying was 29% less likely to use a value actualization tool. Consensus purchases, where folks would talk and work with one another informally, was pretty even, about 3% more likely. But then committees who are making significant investments in technology and services, big ticket items, they were actually a whopping 65% more likely than all other organizations to use a value actualization tool. And I think basically there's just more necks to choke, and everybody realizes that they're part of a problem, part of a project. They don't want it to become a problem. In fact, we're presenting at our own event next week about how to assess the risk for different scenarios. And one of the crucial natures is make sure you understand what the outcome is of all of the actions that you take around your scope, the people you have on the team, the technology that supports it, et cetera. And then, another sort of trending situation, you referenced this about 2 minutes ago, Tom. You talked about how, a wider, more open discussion between buyer and seller is the norm today. And that's absolutely true in a generation where we all have more opportunities to communicate with one another and celebrities and complete strangers than we ever did before. And I think the generational change in communications in the business marketplace also shows us where these VATs are fitting in. Everybody who is my age, pre-1965 date of birth, those folks are 29% less likely to use a value actualization tool in making their technology or service purchase. Folks who are in your Gen X years, basically born 1965 to 1980, 14% more, and our trusty millennials, born 1981 and later, they're 21% more likely to use the value actualization tool. So, obviously the trend is uphill as, folks like me go downhill.
Too funny. And, that has implications as well on the selling side because the buyers have an expectation that it's going to be instrumented by technology in a fun, easy-to-use way. Sellers, I would imagine, on the same side, when you're trying to get new sellers up to speed and kind of accelerate the new hires, it's got to kind of play there. And I know we've got some research here in a little bit to talk about that, where you're newer, if you're wanting to recruit those newer, top-notch sales reps, you got to arm them with the right tools, and then if you're wanting to have them sell to a younger generation, this up-and-coming generation, you've got to do the same. A couple of things in here that struck me, Peter. IT pros, 40% more likely to use versus other personas. Why do you think that is? I know that more IT purchases, in fact, this year for the first time it really crossed significantly, according to some IDC research that we've gotten, that business is clearly in control of a lot more of the decisions. But from your research, it looks like IT professionals, buyers on that side, are more likely to use value actualization tools, expect to be engaged with them. Why do you think that is?
It's probably just because of the linear style of thinking, understanding the columns and the rows and being data-driven and understanding how to implement projects. I think the IT folks, perhaps more than the line of business, marketing and selling and L&D leaders who suddenly are making independent purchases a lot of times now of SaaS solutions, when they do need to bring IT, and IT is like, okay, but there's a certain level of rigor that we need to apply to this purchase, and that rigor involves actually creating a yardstick that works and holding up the yardstick to before, during, and after, and just sort of putting some of that formalization around it. They know how to buy, put it that way. They also know how to build, which isn't always to the favor of the line of business leaders. But more and more IT folks are resisting that innate, I think, DNA-driven motivation to build, because they recognize that there's so many solutions out there, and they can concentrate on a lot of core IT projects if they're really just serving as an advisor and integrator with the line of business projects.
Yeah, and I think a big part, too, is, going back to my days at Gartner, and I know a lot of SiriusDecisions folks came from there, too, is they've kind of had these types of tools and models for a while, right? The IT pros to do total cost of ownership analysis and business cases for various tech purchases. And with the bursting of the tech bubble, it kind of put extra effort on, we need to do our outcome diligence here because we got burned. So I think that's a good part of it. And the other thing that was surprising is the amount of procurement and sourcing professionals that are looking at outcomes, not just negotiating the biggest discount, but actually thinking about value as part of the purchase process.
Yeah, that's a very positive evolution. I and you and most of the folks probably who are joining us today have carried the bag at one point or another. And, let's face it, procurement was seen as the Department of Sales Prevention. And it is what it is. They serve a very, very vital function in our organization, and we all benefit from it in some ways. But when we're selling, man, that's just a huge speed bump. So the fact that they are evolving to the point where they're like, well, you know what, it's not just about price or the cheapest widget or the most favorable terms of our contract. Let's actually get involved in the business-driven outcome of what we're buying. It's really, it's very, it's uplifting to see these procurement organizations taking that path.
Yeah, I totally agree. So what I want to do is, we know that this has been a persistent challenge in being able to communicate and quantify value. And I think a big part of that is really not understanding, in some cases, the incredible challenges that organizations are facing with their sales teams and marketing performance. And, providing maybe some fuel to create a better business case could get us the investments we need to overcome that number one challenge that's been there for the past 6 years. So first, one of the first metrics that strike me in terms of performance is that win rates have really been challenged. There's a lot of competition, and the competition is coming from a new place that many might not be aware of. So our friends at CSO Insights, MHI Global now, did a little bit of research in terms of overall win rates, and they found that 31% of deals lost to the competition, and that's on average. And when we look at the other competitor, which is status quo and no decision, so the customers that are considering a solution but decide to just stick with the status quo because maybe it's too risky or too expensive or they don't have the resources, whatever that reason might be, maybe there's not a good enough business case, that's 32%. So actually the biggest competitor in most organizations is no decision, and then for the others, it's competition. So wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the recommendations you've got in terms of, if you're going to implement value actualization tools, how it can move the needle on these two metrics and really decrease these and increase the overall win rate.
Yeah, Tom, when it comes to the no decision, again, those of us who've carried the bag and borne the quota, nothing is more annoying and nothing is more embarrassing than ending an opportunity in the SFA with just literally no dispensation. They stayed exactly with what they were. In a proper guided selling type of environment where you see sort of a combination of human learning and machine learning coming together, this shouldn't happen. I mean, technically it should not happen. If we really are on top of our data well enough and we're able to use some of the predictive and prescriptive analytics associated with the newfangled machine learning solutions out there, whether it's around content or training or messaging or whatever, the 32% shouldn't be happening. But the reason it is because a lot of organizations are still running their 21st century sales organizations as if they were 20th century teams, which is a lot of gut-driven decision-making, a lot of phony and poor and inaccurate forecasting that's based on emotion and fear. And I mean, hey, I've been in Monday morning meetings where the manager says, hey, Ostrow, what are you going to do for us this month? I'm going to do 50K. What do you mean, Ostrow? You need to do 65 to hit your number. Okay, so I'll do 65, in front of all my peers. At the end of the month, I do 51. And, the manager comes back, well, why didn't you do 65? You promised me 65 because you made me promise 65. So, it's a matter of proper pipeline management and then, divorcing oneself from the emotions, and obviously not to go too deep into the Spock-Kirk relationship, but, using some of the data to help us understand what is or isn't likely to close is not that difficult these days. But one of the components of that data should be, does our champion understand the value of our solution, and are they properly enabled to communicate that value to the hidden deal makers, the hidden decision makers, and the folks above that level that we haven't been able to gain access to?
Totally agree. And when it comes to the no decision, probably one of the biggest challenges there, and where I see a lot of sales reps and marketing kind of fall down, is we jump to the benefits and the ROI of the solution when we haven't even resonated with the customer on the pain and the cost of doing nothing. And I think if we concentrate a little bit more on content and value actualization tools that focus on the pain and get everyone in agreement in this committee or consensus buying that the pain is really worth addressing, they'll find a way to get it done. And it's likely that they won't leave that problem around there, especially if we've prioritized it and quantified it high enough, both emotionally and logically, so that they know not addressing this is so costly, we have to do something. Then it becomes a matter of the competition and being able to differentiate your unique business value and quantify total cost of ownership advantages kind of leads to that next step. And in this same research, CSO Insights indicated that a typical company has about a 37% win rate on average. That if you're able to move the organization from kind of poor practices or moderate practices in business value and ROI to excellence, that this has one of the biggest impacts on overall win rates. You can take that from 37% to a whopping 51%. by doing these two things really effectively. All right, so the next lever that we can maybe move the needle on with value actualization tools in this program is sales cycles. And wanted to first learn, are sales cycles getting longer, shorter? Kind of what are some of the challenges that sales is facing in this area?
Yeah, well, as you can see from the data, they're getting longer, and that doesn't put any of us in our happy place because the speed of business is always increasing and the competition is never going away. Some of the reasons behind that are also presented here, which is the huge percentage of deals that involve 5 or more people who have to contribute to making a final decision. And so when you communicate value, which is the purpose of today's discussion, one mistake that we see a lot of organizations doing is creating a single line of thought, a single plan of attack to communicate the value of our solution or product to the buyer. Those two magically awful words that folks don't realize. The buyer represents, in some cases, maybe one actual human being who will pull the trigger. But if nearly half of these deals involve almost a half a dozen people or more, then you have to understand that value means something very different to the folks on the committee. So if someone is buying, a piece of technology for a line of business that's going to help, let's say, the marketing organization, the CMO sees value in from one perspective. The CIO is going to see it from another. Ops, finance, accounting, these folks, all who are involved on the committee base to make the decision, they have different wins. They have different, to your point on the earlier slide, Tom, they have different reasons why doing nothing is not an option. But unfortunately, I think the reason the sales cycle is getting longer is because the complexity of these cycles is being naturally extended by not just the number of people involved, but 3/4 of them have more than 2 departments involved. And so when you go all the way back to boot camp, when we all want to train our reps as fast as humanly possible, we let them out of the cage probably before they're ready. And in fact, 44% of companies tell us that they let their reps out when the manager says they're ready, as opposed to quantifying it with any kind of certification or testing. The issue there is that we're not training folks to understand that there are different buyer personas for our different solutions. Some of them we communicate directly with, some of them are not. And so mobilizing your champion to communicate your value internally is exactly the right point here. And the problem with value-oriented selling is we think we're talking to the person who's the buyer. If we recognize that we're not, we often make that rookie mistake of saying, well, let me talk to your boss, or some version of that. There are ways to accomplish that, and that's not the focus of today's discussion, but we all know that telling someone that they're not important enough to talk to them is probably not the easiest way to make a sale that person is involved with.
Exactly, and making them the mobilizer, the champion, kind of arming them with the unique value story, the unique points of value that each of the stakeholders they're going to have to go to kind of gain consensus or to gain approval from that committee is essential. We also find that if you leave some of the nitty-gritty, like the actual quantification, the financial justification up to the buyer, that they really struggle. That 2/3 of them don't have the metrics, don't have the framework, the model. They might have from the CFO a little ROI spreadsheet that they could use to crunch the numbers, but they don't know how to tally the business value, and particularly the unique business value you can deliver. They might not have a clear idea of all the costs involved, and they're really looking for advice from solution providers to kind of arm them with that. And if we don't provide that to them, that could be a 2 or 3 month delay in a typical cycle.
And delay doesn't help. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, delay doesn't help anybody. I mean, from all the obvious perspectives of, if you're in a SaaS business or an MRR business, obviously those numbers go south. But even if you just think about the people who comprise your B2B sales team, Tom, the cost of turnover gets higher. The cost of undercovered and uncovered territories gets higher. The bad choices that a lot of organizations are making around certification and productivity. Again, that speaks to why some of the stuff we were discussing a moment ago about prescriptive analytics, guided selling, machine learning are so popular. The thing about more people and departments being involved, it's going to slow down the cadence, and therefore, how are we going to make up the difference? Well, better skills training, which is why you see the rise of things like video coaching, more team-based selling, so that we can attack their multiple personas with our multiple personas, as many people on the playing field. And then when we break down the whole, education, solution, selection, chronology that buyers tend to go through, we do see a lot of organizations thinking more and more about the content that will support those conversations so that they can actually tie the right message to the right person at the right time, both externally in terms of their customer and buyer-facing content, but even empowering their reps. So training reps into how to speak to value doesn't just take place as an event. It's got to be a lifestyle. And sometimes it's a technology that will deliver that. Sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it's a gamified
usually
environment.
A combination. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever it might be, we all know that we should take time now and then to do some learning, but we all have numbers to hit, so we generally don't do it. So if the learning actually finds us instead of the other way around, and there are environments where that's happening very successfully, that learning, which is everything from the speeds and feeds that I need to know if I haven't sold a widget to a certain type of customer before, all the way up to the more elegant and crucial, how does my customer's life get better if they make this investment? Having that stuff find the rep in real time where they live, physically and metaphorically, that's the ticket.
Yeah, and one of the big things that we're proponents of is, can you shape the interactive experience that the buyer has with the seller and the seller has with the buyer? So having the right content there for them kind of farmed up when they need it is a good thing. But if you can reshape their experience with tools, so instead of pulling up a PowerPoint or going to the whiteboard, they can interact and do a diagnostic assessment. They can benchmark key metrics of the customer against their peers. They can kind of get an interactive story that gets told, but a story that aligns specifically to the challenges that were uncovered for that buyer so that they're not wasting time on things that don't matter much to that buyer. And then the ability to kind of talk to the value and quantify that value at the same time. So, one of the things we're working on is, how do you gamify and guide that direct experience at that last mile, which is the conversation. So when they're sitting next to the customer, when they're in an online meeting, when they're in front of the committee, how do you reshape that conversation directly, I think, is important. So one of the other move the needle items that we know value selling can have an impact on, and value marketing, is around discounting. And this research was pretty amazing, Peter, when we first uncovered it and we talked about it. Talk a little bit about discounting and price and the factor it has in buying decisions.
Sure. Well, the big single-digit number that our guests today see on the screen tells a lot of the story. We asked our customers in our benchmarking process, what's the most significant driver of the decision to select the vendor of choice, the people who won? And it was, basically 9%, 8.6% of buyers said price is the most significant element. And obviously much smaller than all the other crucial things like understanding the value, integrating with my current technology, et cetera, et cetera. And to the point that we made earlier about the three flavors of how buying gets done, your independent buyer was the highest at 13%. One person making a decision. That's not that often, obviously, as we saw. When you get down to consensus and then finally committee-based buyer, it moves to 11, and then only 5% of committee-based determinations of who to go with were actually based on price. So, yeah, price represents probably the weakest link or the strongest link for a lot of B2B sellers. For those whose employers don't know how to explain the value through the lens of the buyer needs, the competitive landscape, help them with really awesome battle cards, they're basically dooming their reps to fail when it comes to the pre-negotiation and negotiation phases. So what do? We're like water. We find the least common denominator, and we just go to price because it's what we feel we can flex the most. For winners, they've already determined their pricing strategy through very thorough market research, price optimization tools, et cetera, and they make it into one of the least important sticking points in the buyer's mind, which, again, that helps create the champion, which in turn will probably help eliminate that no decision, which is just so frustrating to all of us.
Yeah, and when you talk to sales reps and you do kind of win-loss analysis, I know it's very common. Well, why did we lose? Well, we priced the deal too high. We were not competitive on the price. That's got to come up as one of the main excuses, probably 2/3 of the time, I would think, and that's just my gut feel on it. And this clearly shows that isn't necessarily true. It's one of several dimensions of buying experience. Understanding and aligning to the value and outcome are way more important than price. Yet when we talk to some firms, particularly in some commoditized technology areas like networking or some others, I mean, it's not uncommon that they're discounting 40 to 65%. Just huge discount factors that are being applied to win the business. And clearly this shows that, if there were other elements involved, like understanding value and aligning to it and proving, the value versus the price or lower risk and faster payback, that you don't necessarily have to discount.
No, not at all. And you mentioned win-loss analysis. To me, that's one of the most underserved components of the sales enablement space. Win-loss is so crucial, but you have to do it right. And of course, people are going to personalize things and point fingers rather than hold up mirrors if you give them the chance to do so. I've done some research where I found that folks who use win-loss, formal win-loss analysis, are 40% more likely to support regular, structured sales manager communications with reps and providing feedback on their performance. It's such a basic need, but it's not as formalized as you'd think. They're 33% more likely to have a formalized onboarding process that includes value discussions, and there's 57% more likely to regularly and formally review their account strategies against actual rep activity. So the strategy for a single pursuit is often going to be like, we're going to demonstrate our value, we're going to knock off the competition, we're going to do all of this. Well, what did the rep actually do? They bent on price because it was the easiest and the safest comfort zone to retreat to. But at the end of the day, frankly, you're sending a message that you get what you pay for, and those of us who have sold know that, sometimes on the 31st of the month, you've got to do what you've got to do. It's not a perfect world, but when you make it practice, when you make it the default first strategy, it's normally going to be associated with all of the other poor metrics that we've seen. And, 91% of the time, that's not why you win a deal.
We also see that introducing kind of value earlier in the discussion, so doing value discovery, benchmarking the organizations against their peers to kind of identify issues and really illuminate that cost of doing nothing in the beginning, and then kind of aligning it to outcomes and then demonstrating against those outcomes is really critical. And I think making that change can have a significant impact on the discounting in particular, because it holds off the jump to price, which tends to be pretty early in the conversation. It gets the whole team focused on the pain, quantifying that, the gains, quantifying that, and then ultimately price and the return on investment that can be had. So about a 20% reduced discount deal size lift is what IDC says, and we've actually achieved much, much higher numbers with several of our customers that have adopted. So a great way to kind of have an impact. We spoke about sales quota early in the conversation, Peter, and I want to address that because I alluded to it being a big issue. And, your latest research really indicates that sales quota performance and consistency in particular remains a challenge right across the sales teams.
For sure.
And I think the number that you used is 41% of sales reps currently meeting or exceeding quota. So 59% not doing so. That's one of the highest numbers that I've seen, and it may not be, but what's the trend there, and what are you seeing in terms of that quota performance?
The trend is fairly flat. It's a surprising number, but it's well documented. Almost the bigger issue here is above the individual performer level, because we've all got our A and our B and our C players, and we decide how to manage them and map their own career journeys or lack thereof inside our organizations. But it's the manager level, the team leader who has 5 or 10 or 15 people, and they have the team number. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations today are adding up the quotas of their individual team members and coming up with a sum that is equal to the total of their parts, and that is our number. So if 4 out of 10 people are making their number, 6 out of 10 are not, are we going to have those 41% be so far over quota to account for the deficiencies of the rest? Probably not. And so that being the number one issue associated with value and communication, people are not having the right conversations. I mean, this sounds all gloomy and doomy. Lots of people have lots of great conversations. Let's make it clear. 41% of organizations, this isn't the week to be all doomy and gloomy. 41% of conversations aren't of reps are hitting their number. They're doing their million or whatever it is, and that's good. But it's the quality of the conversations that take place and when they take place and the insight into what should we be communicating at the appropriate point in that buyer's journey that matters the most. And I think your point earlier and here about communicating value earlier in the buyer's journey is crucial. Unfortunately, as scary as it is, we all get these inbound calls and emails now and then, LinkedIn messages that are all product-centric. Me, and they're not with them. They're not what's in it for me. And if I'm an executive and I have the potential to spend some money to do something that will help me do my job better, frankly, my first thought is how am I going to look good and not bad? And that denotes exactly to the value that I'm going to add to my organization. So if my rep is talking about price or speeds and feeds or the competition, or so happy to see that you downloaded our white paper, when can I have the check, those just aren't the right approaches. And so, when we look at the data point on the right, 65% of the marketing content that B2B organizations produce is not actioned by sellers. The buyers never see it. So we do a lot of discussion around the sales asset management space. It's the number 2 initiative amongst all of our benchmarked customers, only behind improved selling skills, which we've talked about, and content usage is actually the number 2 metrics that sales enablement professionals use to judge how well their team is doing, only behind did they complete their proper certified training. So understanding how to use the right content and messaging to support the conversation, the discussion about value, the cost of doing nothing, these are the things that our top performing companies are hitting on all pistons.
Yeah, and what strikes me in that 65% is, if you're in product marketing, and that's a lot of my original background was in that. I owned a couple of product lines. You're producing the content, and then you find out how little sales uses, and that content is, you're working hard to make sure it's value focused. It can be very frustrating. We find, I think that from the Sirius research, that about 50% of that 65% is sales reps just can't even find the content, right? There's so much thrown at them, and there seems to be maybe an overabundance of content, and then not good tools to kind of guide them to it. That's the issue, and that's where the sales asset management, the SAM solutions are kind of coming into play. And then we find, I think, another half where sales is saying, you know what, that content just isn't the right content. I don't think it's right. My buyers, it doesn't seem to resonate with them. So I think part of it is we've got to produce maybe less of the right kind of content to engage on value, maybe make it interactive so there's less of it. It tunes itself automatically for the right selling situation and customizes itself on the fly. So you can go to one piece of content that'll actually bring the right case studies, the right story, the right value points and for the different roles that you're selling to, and the right quantification altogether. I think less content is something we have to look at. Getting the right content in their hands with sales asset management is certainly another thing to look at. And then just kind of tracking that it's the right content and that it's moving the needle is important. And here too, when CSO Insights looked at what ROI selling can do, which is what they called kind of the value actualization tools front and practices around that, they specifically looked at sales quota performance. And from the going from good to great, you could essentially get, according to their research, not ours, 46% lift in reps meeting or beating quota, and a 13% increase in plan attainment just across the board. So, a 13% increase in revenue by getting this right. This alone should enable you to justify, more investment in that value selling. And then, Peter, the last kind of lever I wanted to look at with you is often with companies nowadays, or at least we hear from it, and I know Heather Cole on the team has done a lot of research in the sales rep ramp-up area. There's turnover, and in order to grow, companies are adding sales reps. 65% are going to add new reps over the next 12 months. What do you see as the big challenge here, and where does kind of value actualization fit in?
I think it pertains to what we refer to at SiriusDecisions as the entire sales talent lifecycle. We look at it, and it's kind of an academic approach, but we break it down into 3 major components: attract, onboard, and optimize, where you find the right talent, you train it properly, not too quickly, but well, and then you optimize it over time so that folks are long-term producers and they're successful in their own career. What we weave through all of those to keep things consistent is the idea of competencies. And we see the top performing companies taking a look and saying, you know what, let's write down all of the knowledge, the process, and the skills that a successful rep in this particular role, and it can vary by job persona, it can vary by region, by industry vertical, needs to have in order to be successful at their job. Those competencies can be anything from how to enter an opportunity into the Salesforce automation properly, how to fill out an expense report, but also obviously some of the higher level capabilities that revolve around how to have the right conversations with buyers. So we look at a lot of boot camps that are, these show up and throw up environments where the whole goal is to get them tested out as quickly as possible. One customer told me the other day, if they get an 80 or better on the test, we let them go. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, so you're happy with your reps all hitting 80% of their number. So by identifying which competencies are necessary to drive customer success, you're actually reverse engineering it right back to when you hire, when you onboard, when you certify, and then when you release into the wild your reps. And so if value discussions need to be part of how they're going to sell to their buyers, those have to be expressed right up front in boot camp itself, where understanding our customer, what are the pains of the customer, what makes a difference to the customer, when is our customer likely to take action, when is doing nothing an acceptable route for our customer. And then we train around it, we certify around it, we test in the field around it, and then we actually observe it with 4- and 6-legged sales calls. And it's a very consistent expression of these competencies, Tom, that helps folks understand that we're being very transparent about what success looks like in this role. People will tend to respect that. Unfortunately, we see that about 26% of organizations have no onboarding in place whatsoever. We ask folks, when do you think a rep is productive? And the number one answer is actually when they sell their first deal. I can personally tell you that that's not true, because as a sales leader, I gave lots of sweetheart opportunities to folks on my team just to help kickstart them, but it didn't mean that they were trained, it didn't mean that they were ready. And and today's candidates are also looking for a different experience in their own ramp up than sellers of old. If we look at the millennials, not to pick on this cohort, but they're representing a larger and larger component of our new hires in sales. These folks are 39% more focused than non-millennials around taking a job over cultural reasons, not just the pay, not just the comp, not just the benefits, but the culture of the organization, which includes how do we treat our customers, how do we create voracious customers who love us, and that's reverse engineering right back from the customer's win to who we decide to bring on board. And right now, as you and I were discussing before the webinar, the economic indicators are actually fairly strong in terms of the jobs market, in the information space that most of us live in, and only 3% of very high-performing reps, folks who have hit their number the last 2 years, are actively looking for work. So that's crucial, is to understand how to tap into the people who are interested in gaining this expertise, how to deliver it, and then how to make sure that it's taking place at the right part of the buyer's journey.
Yeah, that's a crucial number that you threw out there. So, attract, onboard, optimize. On attract, if you're only going to get, 3% of those high-performing reps are looking or available, it's hard to attract them, so it's likely you're going to get a B or perhaps a C or perhaps a millennial that might not have sold before, but you're kind of shifting your sales to perhaps a lower-cost commodity model, which we see in a lot of organizations, and the ability to get them to communicate and be guided on that value communication, I think, is more important than ever. And, there's skills involved, there's content, and I think value actualization tools, particularly ones that can help them to tell the story, do the quantification, and also communicate the evidence and the case studies, absolutely critical. So one of the things, Peter, we had a customer of ours, Splunk, and David Caradona did, for the Value Selling Council, did an independent kind of presentation of the best practices they use, and we'll provide a link to the folks on this call and in the PowerPoint to kind of hear it in David's own words. But we've been working with Splunk for the past almost 4 years now on creating a value selling suite for them. And around this suite, they put a good training program together. They onboard, I believe, over 30 to 50 new reps every month, and specialists, and also I think they take their regular employees through this value selling process too. So everyone within Splunk is oriented around the value that can be delivered to the customer. And around the suite, with only 5 or so folks in their value selling office, they're able to get their sales reps and specialists to do about 1,500 business cases to prospects over the last year alone. And in fact, I think the last quarter that they presented on, there were over 700 that last quarter. So they're getting an amazing boost in automating this so that for every 50 reps, they've got a value specialist. And on average, it's usually about a 24-to-1 ratio. So they're able to do a lot more in terms of communicating and quantifying value with less, and have found a way to scale. I think more importantly, the sales reps that are using it and the deals that this is used on, first of all, on the new hires, they're able to get an acceleration of somewhere between 30 and 90 days. That's what was about as precise as we could get from them. But if you're able to shave a month or perhaps even 3 months off of the average time that a rep takes to become confident in selling, amazing on the new hire process. A 2x improvement in order size. So not only are they not discounting, but they're able to sell more to different business units within the organization by making a broader case and upselling and cross-selling. And over the past year, about $120 million in wins. So it started with having kind of an easy-to-use value actualization tool and a collection of those tools. Then they map that directly to the sales process of when to use it. And then they certify folks in the use of it. And it enabled that 5-person team to generate just a ton of additional and incremental revenue in a tough market, that kind of a big data market with competitors like Tableau and others is not an easy market to play in. And they've definitely taken just the absolutely incredible performance in moving the needle with increased order size, decreased sales cycle, and new hire acceleration, and increased win rates. And, when we talk about the journey, Peter, one of the things I wanted to present was, you have to think across that journey, and we talk about, marketing being involved in that journey, sales being involved in that journey. It's nonlinear with customers, right? They're consuming assets off of the website. They're meeting with salespeople. There are multiple folks involved in the decision, and some may be early in the journey decision process, while your champion or mobilizer might be much later. So we see that there's a need for different levels of tools, some that you give to your customers that may be a little bit simpler, but still are able to kind of communicate the story around the value and help them with the quantification. Earlier in the sales cycle, it's about discovery, assessment, and benchmarking. And then as you progress through, it becomes more about kind of estimating the value and communicating the unique value you deliver. And then in the end, it's about kind of providing that CFO business case. And underneath it all, we find that you really have to have a strong foundation of understanding the challenges your buyer faces and the value messaging, the storytelling, and the quantification that needs to go with it. And if you build these tools without that part of the process first, it can often miss the mark. So any comments in terms of the buyer's journey and kind of this nonlinear decision-making process that buyers are involved in now, or the use of value early?
I think it addresses the appropriate fact that the buyer's journey is not omnidirectional, nor it is limited to one person taking the same speed and the same cadence. And if we're looking for what is the common denominator that we can filter into all the different discussions that we're having with those 5 people involved in a decent percentage of the buying scenarios that we're engaged with. Or if someone, takes an unexpected couple of weeks away from our planned cadence, they have something else they have to deal with, or they go on PTO. We're so indoctrinated with this idea that this is the journey, this is the cadence, it must take place, and you're not doing your job as a rep if somebody stays too long in one particular phase. Those are some good scientific approaches to things, but some degree of flexibility is crucial. The discussion about what's in it for the buyer and how will their life not change for the worse and change for the better if and when they make the investment, that's the glue that holds all of these conversations together. And a really strong B2B seller and the marketing organization behind them will always focus on that value. They'll always focus on what is the cost of doing nothing, what is the cost if I do something, what's the takeaway if I do that. And that way the conversations, regardless of where somebody is in the journey, regardless if somebody else hops on the bus 3 out of 7 steps through their journey, there's that common denominator, the lingua franca of the deal, if you will, that should put everybody in a more comfortable place, recognizing that everyone is focused on the exact same outcome, and that is the buyer's benefit.
And Peter, one of the other elements on here, so, in the beginning it's about why change the priorities, why should we do it now in terms of compared to everything else we've got on our plate, why you, what's your unique value. But we've added this last step, which is why renew, because so many businesses now are recurring services or solution businesses. And, being able to go in and prove that the ROI or the business case that you proposed is actually being achieved, and doing that on a regular basis, we think is absolutely essential to winning that continued business. And waiting till the end, till just before the renewal to prove your value, doesn't cut it. It has to be kind of part of a customer success process.
Oh, come on, Tom. We all know that you don't need to talk to a customer until 11.9 months. You can ignore them the rest of the year.
Sales reps do it every day. And so, yeah, absolutely essential. And one of the things that we've implemented is that just such a customer success program. And, from IDC looking at the data that we're getting back from those programs, $8 for every dollar invested in value actualization is what ultimately is being achieved. But what we've done is we hired a sales enablement expert from AMD, David Statura, and he's been working to create this 5-pillar program to kind of elevate the success of business value or value actualization tools to kind of drive a superior experience for the sales rep or the customer and integrate it into the work stream so it's integrated with the sales asset management or CRM solution. Make sure that the customers are rolling it out with the right education and support, keeping the tool current and evolving it because sales reps know when content gets stale, it won't resonate. And then the biggest thing is measuring the outcomes. So on a quarterly basis, we're definitely practicing what we preach here in analyzing how well the tools are being adopted and how we're moving the needle on each of those metrics and a couple more that we measure as well that we discussed so that you're kind of assured that either the programs are generating what they're supposed to or that there's dynamic advice, at least on a quarterly basis, to kind of get it to where the needle is moving in the right direction and we're achieving everything that needs to be achieved. So, Peter, I know that I've seen some questions come in, and what I'd like to do is turn it back over to Mark, and he can provide some of those questions so we can get some of those answers out to the folks.
Okay, a reminder to everyone, please send me your questions to all panelists using the chat feature in WebEx. If we do not get to your question today, we will follow up with you in email. We'll also send you a link to the recorded WebEx in the slides. Also, note that I've added in the chat session a link to David Caradona's session from Splunk that Tom referenced a little while ago. You can check that out. Check in the chat section. So, our first question. We sometimes struggle with tools adoption from our sales reps. How do we best overcome this barrier to achieve the indicated results?
Yeah, Peter, I swear every webcast just about this is top of mind. And maybe one of the issues why we're facing that #1 repeat issue, right?
It is. Well, the shortcut is you just don't pay people commissions if they don't adopt your tool, but I don't sense that that's probably
the stick strategy, right?
that most effective. So, the best deployments of sales tools and, programs, whether it's conversational support, whether it's CPQ, whatever it might be, reverse engineers back from the life of a rep. We do these relative productivity studies, sort of a time and emotion scenario with our customers where we actually take a look and put them under the microscope, some of their reps, and figure out where they're spending their time. And it's a basic 2x2 grid that says core versus non-core, customer-facing versus non-core. Most people come up short and they realize, wow, you know what? If we just add up the minutes, they become hours, they become dollars, and they become huge opportunities to spend more time. Time is our enemy constantly, all of us day to day, especially in a quota-bearing type of environment. So if we invent and deploy and support a tool that we think is going to make life better for our reps, first of all, it has to be geared towards making their time be used more efficiently. And then secondly, there's just the human factor of deploying something. In reality, it is not easy. You don't have a long attention span for people who are stressed by hitting their number to get them to come off of the phones and come off of the customer meetings and spend time learning something. So the best tools themselves are pretty much self-teaching, like any good app on the App Store. And there are a couple of things that you can do to force the situation without dinging people's commission checks. You can do some A/B testing. You can take a select group, a test group of employees, and bribe them to try a new technology with money or a non-cash incentive of some sort, or just goodwill. Or if you want to keep your job, you'll be part of this group. However you try, you determine carrots versus sticks, and you create a proof case. You prove that this will help folks in certain ways. Obviously, the viral spread of what we like and what we don't like is an ingrained part of our culture today, consumer and business related. But we also have to make sure that it's geared towards the reps. I see a lot of solutions out there that are geared towards, hey, managers, you're going to get much better Big Brother insight into what your reps are doing if you buy this technology. And all that it requires is that the reps take 6 minutes every single day, stop doing their jobs, and give you enough data so that you can spy on them better. And that's just not going to work because it's obviously geared towards the perspective of the manager and not the reps. So if you treat your reps as if they were customers and you think about with them and what's in it for me, and you jimmy the situation just a little bit to make sure that you have some strong, positive early adoption by some friendlies, no harm, no foul, and it usually will deploy more successfully.
Yeah, totally with you. Mark, next question.
Very good. So, by the way, I'm getting a couple comments that the link I just added doesn't seem to be working. We'll check that and send that out with the recording to everyone after the call. So the second question is, every year value comes up as the number one issue. It's a question, why isn't it getting resolved?
We talked a little bit about this, Peter, right? We're 6 years in the running. So what do you think are the key points there?
So what exactly was the question? Just restate it for me.
So every year value comes up as the number one issue.
Oh, yeah. So because we're not winning our deals. And so we certainly discovered that the case was never made. And whatever the sort of objective or subjective approach through the win-loss was, I just didn't see the point. I didn't see the value. I didn't have a compelling case. And you could reverse engineer backwards from somebody saying that far back into the sales cycle and realize that it was never determined and conversed up front. It was all just about speeds or feeds, or about solving a smaller problem and not really getting to the root of an issue.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is there's a cultural change that has to go on. There's a lot of training around the features, the functions of the service, how to articulate and demo, and I think that when sales reps leave the training, they're pretty competent in talking about the solutions themselves, but often not about engaging with the business and engaging with the customer the way they want to be engaged. So I think we just need to invest a lot more in this area, and we know that this is still a niche. As you said, in terms of the overall investments that are being made, selling skills is tops, and we see that a lot of times those skills are not about how to engage or engage with customers on the needs and the business. A lot of it is still proportionately around the speeds and feeds of the solutions. And then the second highest investment is in sales asset management solutions, where we've got to overcome that 65% of the content's not used, so we've got to get them to find the content. But a lot of times that content may not be the right content to help the seller align with the needs of the buyer and identify that value. So I still think that this is too low on the list as an investment, where value actualization tools and some of the new breed of them that we're kind of pioneering aren't necessarily getting the investment and the organization around them, the organizational focus that it needs. We see that organizations that do it, like Splunk, Workday, several other ADP customers that we have, they've got huge move-the-needle benefits from it. But even in some of those organizations, we're still seeing it not even as high an investment as perhaps it could be compared to some of these others. And we know that we move the needle more than some of those when it's implemented correctly. So I still think there's more investment needed in this space, and part of why Peter and I kind of put this together was so that you can kind of prove the value of, if you can move the needle on these key metrics that we know you're being measured on, whether it be discounting or sales rep, ramp up, sales cycles, win rates. This is one of the highest ways to get those needles moved within the organization by investing in value selling and marketing.
Okay,
Mark?
we are at the top of the hour. Thank you, Peter and Tom, for participating in our event today. And, of course, a special thank you to all attendees for joining us today in this live session. We hope to see you at the Alenian Business Value Roadshow, March 1st in Santa Clara, California, or March 9th in Boston, Massachusetts. Good value selling and marketing, everyone.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks. Have a good day, everybody.